Eliza sat on the frozen doorstep of her family's cabin, the wind biting at her cheeks and hands, and stared at the empty larder. The winter had come earlier this year, harsher than anyone had expected. Snow covered the fields like a thick, unbroken blanket, and the river that once provided fish and water was frozen solid. Her mother's hands shook as she tried to knead the last bits of flour into bread dough, while her father's face was pale and drawn, etched with the fatigue of endless days spent hunting with nothing to show for it. The hunger was unbearable, gnawing not just at her stomach but at her spirit. At 19, Eliza should have been dreaming of love, freedom, or at least a life beyond the small cabin on the edge of the plains. Instead, she was dreaming of a loaf of bread, of the warmth of a fire, of her parents surviving just one more day. Each morning she woke to the sound of the wind howling like a pack of wolves and the sharp pangs of hunger, reminding her that there might not be a tomorrow if they didn't act soon. The decision, when it came, was not made lightly. Her father had pored over the few remaining coins, counting them again and again, trying to imagine some impossible solution. Her mother had cried herself to sleep more than once, whispering apologies that Eliza couldn't respond to. Finally, a neighbor, one who dealt in trade with the nearby Apache tribe, had offered a solution that would ensure her family's survival. It was a solution that made her stomach turn, that made her heart hammer in fear and shame. She was to be sold. Eliza felt the walls of the cabin closing in as the reality sank in. She was not being sent on a journey or given away as a guest. She was being exchanged, a commodity in desperate times. 19 years of life, education, and dreams distilled into something to trade for food. Her parents held her hands, their eyes wet and haunted. They whispered words of comfort that could not mask their own despair. "We have no choice, Eliza," her father said, voice low and trembling. "We'll survive because of you. Please understand." Understanding came slowly. She packed the few belongings she could carry, nothing of value, only what she could not bear to leave behind: a faded shawl, a locket containing her mother's picture, and a journal that smelled faintly of her childhood. When she stepped outside into the snow, the bitter wind cut through her coat. Every step toward the neighbor's wagon felt like a step away from the life she had known, away from the warmth of her home, and deeper into an unknown that was terrifying and alien. The journey to the Apache camp was silent except for the creaking of the wagon and the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves. Her stomach twisted at every sound, and she kept her eyes down, afraid that if she looked up she might see a future she did not want to face. Every tree, every frozen stream seemed to mock her, reminding her of the freedom she was losing. She tried to steel herself with thoughts of survival, for her parents, for herself, but fear gnawed at her resolve. When the camp appeared over a rise, with smoke curling from the center fire and tents clustered like dark shadows against the white landscape, Eliza's heart leapt into her throat. She saw figures moving, tall, strong, confident, and she froze. Her fear was immediate and tangible, the realization of what awaited her settling like ice in her chest. She was not a visitor, she was not a guest, she was something else entirely, something that had no rights, no voice, at least at first glance. The neighbor stepped forward, explaining to the warriors what had brought her here. Eliza's stomach sank further as she felt their eyes on her, curious, assessing, unblinking. She could only hope that her courage, small as it was, would be enough to carry her through what came next. With one last glance back toward the snow-covered cabin, and the parents who had given her up to save themselves, Eliza took a trembling step into the Apache camp, not yet knowing that her life was about to change in ways no one could have imagined. The Apache camp was unlike anything Eliza had ever imagined. At first glance it seemed chaotic, tents of varying sizes scattered across the snow, children darting between them and fires burning bright against the white landscape. Smoke curled into the cold sky, carrying the scent of wood, cooking meat, and something she couldn't quite place, a wild, earthy smell that made her stomach twist with both fear and curiosity. As she stepped further inside, the warriors who had been observing her from a distance began to move closer. Tall, strong men with painted faces and steady, watchful eyes surrounded her. Their presence was both intimidating and strangely protective, like predators who also guarded their territory. Eliza felt herself shrink beneath their gaze, instinctively lowering her shoulders and keeping her hands clasped together in front of her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet she had no place to go. A woman approached first, her movements graceful and calm, carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone used to being respected. She was not the chief, Eliza could sense that, but she was clearly significant within the tribe. The woman's eyes studied her closely, taking in the tremor in her hands, the way her coat hung too loosely over her thin frame, and the faint color in her cheeks despite the cold. Then with a slight nod, she gestured for Eliza to follow. The path led to the heart of the camp, where a larger fire roared and people gathered around it. Sitting slightly apart on a low, sturdy platform was the chief, Tyanita. The moment Eliza's eyes met his, she felt a jolt of something she didn't recognize, part awe, part fear. He was imposing, taller than any man she had ever seen, with broad shoulders and piercing dark eyes that seemed to see everything, even the smallest tremor of her fear. His hair, long and black, was tied back with a simple leather cord, and his expression was calm, unreadable. He radiated authority without speaking a word, and Eliza realized quickly that this was a man who commanded respect effortlessly. The woman led her forward. "This is Tyanita, our chief," she said softly. "You will stay in our care." Eliza's voice caught in her throat, but she managed to nod. She wanted to say something, anything, but words seemed inadequate in the face of all this strength and unfamiliarity. The chief tilted his head slightly, regarding her with a curious calm. There was no anger, no malice in his eyes, but neither was there immediate warmth. It was as if he were weighing her, measuring her spirit, her worth, her place in this strange new world. A small girl appeared next, no older than 12, her dark eyes bright and curious. She peered at Eliza with a mix of shyness and interest, holding back but clearly eager to approach. "I'm Nayeli," the girl said in halting English. "You new?" Eliza managed a weak smile. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackle of the fire. I'm Eliza." Nayeli's face lit up and she took a small step closer. "You stay with me," she said decisively, as if this small declaration could shield Eliza from the rest of the world. "I show you." And so Eliza was led to a smaller tent at the edge of the camp, away from the direct gaze of the warriors, but close enough that she could hear the rhythm of life here, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, the crackling of fire. Nayeli showed her the simple sleeping arrangements, how to keep her coat close to her body at night, and even offered a small piece of bread she had saved from breakfast. For the first time since leaving her home, Eliza felt a tiny spark of hope. She was still terrified, still alone, and still in a place that was entirely alien. But here, amidst the snow and the strangers, there was also a hint of kindness, a thread of safety. And somewhere, deep inside her, a quiet curiosity began to grow, about the tribe, about the chief, about this strange new world that had swallowed her so completely. As she lay down that night, listening to the wind moan across the camp and the soft breathing of Nayeli beside her, Eliza realized that she was no longer just a girl sold into survival. She was a guest of a powerful, proud people, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to this life than fear. The next morning, Eliza awoke to a world that was both breathtaking and bewildering. The sun had barely crested the snow-covered horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, and the crisp air carried the scent of wood smoke, pine, and earth. Children ran barefoot through the snow, their laughter ringing out like bells, while women moved with quiet efficiency, tending to fires, fetching water, and preparing food. Everything was alive with motion, a rhythm she had never known in her rigid, desperate home. Eliza quickly discovered that living in the Apache camp required more than courage. It required adaptability. Every task seemed foreign. Chopping wood with a heavy axe, fetching water from the icy stream, even something as simple as carrying firewood without stumbling through the snow became a challenge. When she first tried to help prepare breakfast, she dropped a pot of porridge, spilling it across the frozen ground. The smell of burnt oats filled the air, and several women glanced her way, some with quiet disapproval. Eliza's cheeks burned with shame. She felt the eyes of the warriors constantly on her, particularly the chief, Tyanita. Sometimes he watched from a distance, his expression unreadable, and she would catch herself stiffening under his gaze. Other times she felt almost invisible under the protective glance of Nayeli, who seemed to understand more than words could say. Language was another barrier. Though she had learned a few words from Nayeli, Most conversations were beyond her grasp. She misinterpreted instructions, accidentally offended elders by failing to show the proper respect, and struggled to communicate even her most basic needs. At night, she lay on her bedroll exhausted, replaying the day's mistakes over and over, wondering if she would ever truly belong. Her sense of isolation intensified when she observed the strict hierarchy of the tribe. Every action had meaning. Every gesture and word mattered. Eliza realized that the Apache were not just surviving. They were living according to rules, traditions, and honor codes that had been passed down for generations. A simple misstep could mark her as foolish or disrespectful. She felt like an intruder, an outsider who didn't belong anywhere. Yet there were moments of unexpected warmth. Nayeli would take her aside and patiently explain customs, show her the proper way to grind corn, or teach her a song in their language. Slowly, Eliza began to understand the rhythm of the camp, the logic behind their actions, and the way respect was earned rather than demanded. She discovered that humor was shared quietly, smiles were exchanged through small gestures, and even mistakes were forgiven when met with sincerity. The chief remained a constant enigma. Tyanita's presence was imposing but not cruel. He observed quietly, often appearing only at moments when tension threatened the harmony of the camp. He never scolded harshly, but when he did speak, his words carried weight, and Eliza felt the gravity of his authority. One day, while she struggled to carry a heavy bundle of firewood, he appeared silently behind her and said a single word in his language. Surprised, she realized that he had noticed her effort and, without a word of reprimand, was offering guidance. It was the first sign that her struggles were being seen not as failures, but as attempts to adapt. Even as fear and uncertainty remained, Eliza began to notice a shift within herself. She was learning to anticipate the needs of the tribe, to respect their customs, and to find small victories in tasks that once seemed impossible. The clash between her old life and this new one created tension inside her, but it also sparked resilience. Each day she became a little braver, a little more capable, and a little more aware of the subtle connections that tied the tribe together. By nightfall, as the wind howled across the plains and the camp settled into its quiet rhythm, Eliza allowed herself a small sense of accomplishment. She had survived her first day of real challenges. She had stumbled, yes, but she had not broken, and as she watched the chief's dark figure silhouetted against the firelight, she felt a strange mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity, an awareness that despite everything, her life here was beginning to hold the faintest glimmer of possibility. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Eliza began to feel the rhythm of life in the Apache camp. At first, every task felt like a test she might fail, fetching water from the icy river without spilling a drop, tending fires, gathering wood, and learning to cook the way the women of the tribe did. But with each small success, she gained confidence. The laughter of the children no longer made her feel alienated. Instead, it became a background melody to her growing sense of belonging. Her relationship with Nayeli deepened during these weeks. The young girl became her guide, her translator, and occasionally her protector. Nayeli taught her the subtle nuances of their culture, the respectful bow when addressing an elder, the way to present food to the warriors, and how a smile could bridge the gap between fear and trust. Eliza quickly learned that gestures mattered as much as words here, and that sometimes action spoke louder than the awkward English she struggled to master. It was during one of these daily chores that Eliza first caught the chief's attention in a meaningful way. A group of hunters returned from a successful expedition, bringing back a deer. The men were exhausted and the deer was heavy. Eliza, noticing their struggle, stepped forward without being asked and began helping them drag the carcass to the fire pit. Her hands were raw from the cold and the weight, and her muscles burned, but she refused to stop. Tyanita appeared silently behind her, observing the effort, his dark eyes calm and steady. He said nothing at first, simply watching her, as if measuring her determination. When she finally dropped the last piece of meat beside the fire, he nodded once. A subtle gesture, but one that carried more weight than any words. Word of her willingness to help spread through the camp. Elders began to nod at her with approval, and other women began offering quiet guidance rather than judgment. Even some of the warriors, initially skeptical, started to treat her with cautious respect. Eliza could feel the shift in the atmosphere. She was no longer just a girl sold into their care. She was becoming someone who mattered, someone whose contributions were valued. The chief, Tyanita, began to engage with her in ways that were both formal and personal. He would ask her to observe certain tasks, to help make decisions regarding food distribution, or to carry messages to the younger women. At first she was terrified of making mistakes, but she soon realized that he valued initiative and courage more than perfection. One evening, while they were sorting supplies together, he spoke quietly, his voice calm but carrying authority. "You are strong," he said simply. "You endure. That is respect." Eliza's chest tightened at the words. So few had ever acknowledged her strength, and hearing it from him stirred something unfamiliar within her. Pride. It wasn't just her physical efforts that earned respect. It was her intelligence and her insight. She began noticing details others overlooked: how to store food to prevent spoilage, how to reinforce the tents against the wind, even small ways to comfort a child or calm a frightened animal. Her suggestions, offered respectfully, were gradually accepted, and each time one worked. The chief's subtle nod or approving glance reinforced that she was not only surviving but thriving. Yet, amidst the growing trust, Eliza felt a quiet tension. She was aware of the chief's constant observation, the silent weight of his approval. It was not a romantic feeling, at least not yet, but there was an undeniable connection, a sense that he saw more than her actions. He saw her courage, her fears, and perhaps even the fragments of her spirit that had been nearly broken before she arrived. By the end of the week, Eliza's sense of self began to shift. She was no longer just the girl who had been sold out of desperation. She was becoming a person who contributed meaningfully, whose presence mattered, and who could command respect through effort and integrity. The first seeds of mutual recognition had been planted, not yet affection, perhaps, but an unspoken acknowledgement that she was more than anyone, even herself, had expected. As the sun set behind the snow-covered hills, casting a golden glow across the camp, Eliza realized she was no longer the outsider trembling at the edges. She was becoming part of this world, and the chief, the enigmatic Tyanita, had taken notice in a way that promised her life here might be more than mere survival. Perhaps for the first time she had a place and a future that felt worth fighting for. The camp was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. Eliza had grown accustomed to the rhythm of Apache life, but even she sensed that something was off. The hunters had gone out earlier than usual, and the warriors were unusually alert, their eyes scanning the horizon, hands hovering near weapons. Nayeli, normally cheerful and talkative, stayed close to Eliza, her expression tight with unease. Before Eliza could ask, a scout arrived, dusting snow from his clothes, his face pale and serious. "Rival tribe," he said simply, pointing toward the distant tree line. "They move fast. They may strike soon." Fear coiled in Eliza's stomach. She had read about rival tribes and conflicts, seen illustrations in old books, but she had never imagined being caught in the middle of one. Panic threatened to rise, but she forced herself to steady her breathing. Nayeli's small hand gripped hers, a silent anchor against the rising tide of fear. The chief, Tyanita, gathered the warriors immediately. Eliza watched from the edge of the camp as he gave orders with calm precision, his voice low but carrying over the crisp air. Some warriors took positions near the perimeter, others readied horses for quick movement. The tension was palpable. For the first time, Eliza realized that survival here depended not just on following orders, but on courage, quick thinking, and loyalty. Then came the moment that would define her place in the tribe. A group of raiders appeared over the ridge, armed and determined. Chaos erupted instantly. Some warriors engaged directly, shouting war cries that pierced the cold air, while others protected the tents and women. Eliza's first instinct was to hide, but Nayeli's grip on her arm, the terrified but determined look in her eyes, forced her to act. Without thinking, Eliza rushed to help a group of younger children who were trapped near one of the fires. She guided them to a safer spot, shielding them with her body from falling branches and stray arrows. Her hands were scraped, her coat torn, and her heart pounded like a drum, but she refused to let fear control her. The chief appeared beside her suddenly, his presence commanding and fierce. He handed her a small bow, nodding once. "Aim, protect," he said. The words were simple, but the weight of trust behind them was immense. Eliza drew the bow awkwardly at first, her hands trembling. But when a raider crested the ridge, she let the arrow fly. And it struck true. Another warrior gave a low whistle of approval. The battle continued, and Eliza moved as instinctively as she could, following the chief's subtle guidance, helping where she was needed, never hesitating despite the danger. She realized in those moments that the Apache did not measure worth by lineage or birth. They measured it by courage, resourcefulness, and loyalty. Every small success she had earned in the past weeks now mattered more than ever, and she felt the eyes of the chief on her constantly, assessing, approving, acknowledging. By the time the raiders retreated, the camp was battered but intact. Fires still burned, warriors checked on one another, and the children were safe. Eliza stood trembling, covered in snow and grime, heart hammering, body aching but alive. Niley ran to her, throwing her arms around Eliza in a tight embrace, whispering, "You were brave. You helped." Tyanita approached, silent as always, his expression unreadable at first. Then he laid a firm hand on her shoulder, and for the first time, there was a hint of warmth in his dark eyes. "You proved yourself," he said simply. "Not as a girl sold to us, but as one of us." The word struck Eliza like a lightning bolt. She had feared she would always be an outsider, a possession, a girl sold out of desperation. But in the crucible of danger, she had proven her courage, her loyalty, and her worth. And the chief, whose approval had been so carefully measured, so difficult to earn, had finally acknowledged her as more than just a survivor. That night, as the camp settled and the fires crackled, Eliza allowed herself a moment to breathe. The test had been terrifying, exhausting, and humbling, but it had changed everything. She no longer felt like a girl merely surviving in the shadow of others. She felt like someone who belonged, someone who had earned her place in a proud and fierce community. And somewhere in the quiet, steady presence of the chief, she sensed that the trust she had gained today would shape everything that came next. The days following the raid were quieter, but the tension of recent danger lingered in the camp. Eliza moved among the tents and fires with a new confidence. The children greeted her without hesitation, and even the warriors nodded respectfully as she passed. But it was the chief, Tyanita, whose presence weighed most heavily on her thoughts. His eyes, dark and steady, often found hers across the camp, and she felt with each glance that he was quietly observing more than her actions. He was studying her, trying to understand her spirit. One afternoon, he called her to the edge of the camp, away from the firelight and the eyes of others. She approached cautiously, heart hammering. The wind whipped through the tall pines, carrying the scent of snow and cedar. Tyanita stood silently, as if he had always been there, waiting. He gestured to a log, and she sat, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. "You learned quickly," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "You helped where others might have hidden. You did not falter." Eliza's chest tightened. She had tried to hide her fear during the raid, had pushed herself beyond what she thought she could endure. And now, in this rare moment of quiet, the chief was acknowledging it. Not just her skill, but her courage, her resolve. I only did what I thought I had to," she admitted softly, unsure whether honesty would please or disappoint him. He studied her, expression unreadable, then nodded slightly. "That is what I see. You do not act for praise. You act because you must. That is strength." For the first time, the tension she had felt around him shifted. There was no authority pressing down on her now, only recognition. Something deeper stirred within Eliza, a mixture of relief, respect, and curiosity. The chief's eyes held no condescension, no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement of her spirit. Over the following weeks, Tyanita began to involve her in more than just chores or survival tasks. He spoke to her about the ways of the tribe, explaining strategies for hunting, teaching her subtle signs and signals used among the warriors. He shared stories of past conflicts and losses, of the weight of leadership, and of the responsibility he carried for every member of the camp. Eliza listened, fascinated, and began to understand that beneath the fierce exterior was a man who bore immense burdens with quiet dignity. Their conversations became a ritual of sorts. At first they were brief, practical, and formal. Then they grew longer, filled with stories and questions, moments of laughter, and shared silences. Eliza discovered that the chief had a dry sense of humor, often hidden beneath his stoic exterior, and she found herself smiling despite herself. In turn, she shared small pieces of her past, not the entire story, but enough to allow him glimpses of the girl who had been sold into the snow and fear and was now slowly carving out a place for herself. One evening, as they repaired a fence together, Tianita paused, his hand brushing lightly against hers as he handed her a tool. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through Eliza. She looked up at him, heart pounding, and found only calm curiosity in his dark eyes. Neither spoke of it, yet the air between them shifted subtly. What had begun as cautious respect was becoming something more complex. A quiet bond born of shared experiences, trust, and mutual understanding. Eliza began to see that the chief, too, was different from the stories she had imagined in her head about warriors and leadership. There was intelligence, patience, and a sense of justice in him that commanded loyalty without fear, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she realized that her own feelings were changing. The fear that had defined her first days in the camp was giving way to fascination, admiration, and something else, something she did not yet have words for, but that made her pulse quicken whenever their eyes met. By the time the sun dipped below the snow-covered hills, casting long shadows across the camp, Eliza understood that she had crossed an invisible threshold. The chief's trust and attention had created a bond neither of them had spoken aloud, but one that resonated with quiet significance. She was no longer merely surviving in this world. She was beginning to matter to someone powerful, someone whose approval carried weight and whose presence could no longer be ignored. And though she could not yet name the feeling, she sensed that this bond would change everything that came next. Life in the camp had begun to settle into a rhythm, but beneath the surface, currents of tension were forming. Eliza moved with more confidence now, completing tasks with efficiency and earning the respect of many in the tribe. Yet the attention she had gained from the chief, Tianita, did not go unnoticed. Some of the warriors exchanged furtive glances when she passed, whispering in hushed tones. The wind carried their murmurs to her ears, even when she tried to ignore them. At first, Eliza didn't understand. She had earned her place through effort, courage, and quick thinking. Surely that was enough. But as days passed, she noticed subtle changes in the way some of the men looked at her. A lingering stare here, a pointed glance there. Some offered advice she hadn't asked for, and others, less kindly, mocked mistakes she made, no matter how small. The chief's calm gaze seemed to amplify the scrutiny. The warriors were watching not just her actions, but the bond between them. It was Nayeli who first tried to explain. "They talk," the girl said one evening as they sat near the fire stirring a pot of stew. "They say, the chief spends too much time with you. Some are jealous, some suspicious." Eliza's stomach tightened. Jealousy was something she had never experienced on this scale. She had thought of herself as merely a newcomer, a girl who had been sold into survival, not someone who could evoke such attention or suspicion from hardened warriors. "What do I do?" she asked quietly, afraid of what might happen if she made the wrong choice. "You do nothing," Nayeli said firmly. "Just be who you are. The chief sees the truth. The others, they talk, but they are not him." Eliza tried to take the advice to heart, but it was easier said than done. She could feel the eyes of the warriors following her during every chore, every trip to the river, every small movement she made in the camp. She could hear snippets of conversation, laughter that stopped abruptly when she approached, and the subtle shift in energy whenever she and Tianita were together. The tension was tangible, a quiet pressure that made her chest ache. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. One of the younger warriors, emboldened by the whispers of others, approached her while she was gathering firewood. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "You're lucky the chief favors you," he said. "Don't forget your place. Some of us don't like it." Eliza felt her pulse quicken, but she squared her shoulders. "I do my best to help," she said calmly. "That is all anyone can ask." The warrior hesitated, unsure whether to argue further, then grunted and walked away. The encounter left her shaken but also strangely resolute. She would not allow fear or jealousy to dictate her actions. Tianita's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. That evening, he summoned her to a quiet spot near the edge of the camp. His dark eyes studied hers, and he spoke softly, but with a weight that silenced any lingering doubts. "They may speak," he said, "but words are wind. Your actions, your courage, your loyalty, they are what matter. Do not let them shake you. You are part of this tribe because you have earned it." Relief mingled with a fluttering sense of pride in Eliza's chest. The chief's words carried more authority than any argument, any scolding or any whisper of doubt. She realized that while jealousy and rumor might swirl around her, her bond with Tianita and the respect she had earned was unshakable. Even as the whispers continued in the background, Eliza felt a newfound strength. She moved with purpose, understanding that earning respect was one thing, but maintaining it required courage, dignity, and unwavering resolve. She could not control the hearts or minds of others, but she could control her actions. And in doing so, she found a quiet confidence that made her feel invincible in the ways that mattered most. By nightfall, as the camp settled into a rhythm of quiet fires and soft murmurs, Eliza sat with Nayeli reflecting on the day's tension. "They talk," she said softly. "But you were right. Their words cannot touch what the chief believes." Nayeli smiled knowingly. "Exactly. And he believes in you. That is all that matters." In the flickering firelight, Eliza realized that the bond she was forming with Tianita was more than respect or trust. It was a quiet, unspoken connection, growing stronger despite the shadows of jealousy that circled the camp. And she knew that her place in the tribe, and perhaps in the chief's life, was becoming permanent. The cold wind swept across the camp that morning, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and smoke. Eliza had long since grown accustomed to the rhythms of the Apache camp, but today felt different. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a tension she couldn't yet name. Even the children seemed subdued, sensing that something important was about to happen. The chief, Tianita, summoned her with a gesture. Eliza's heart thumped in her chest as she approached him, careful to meet his gaze with respect. His expression was calm as always, but the weight behind it made her stomach tighten. She had faced danger, earned trust, and weathered the whispers of jealousy. But whatever was about to come, she knew it would be unprecedented. "You have shown courage, intelligence, and loyalty," he began, his voice measured, carrying authority that demanded attention. "You have adapted to our ways when many could not. You have faced danger without hesitation. You are no longer a girl sold to us in desperation. You are part of this tribe." Eliza's breath caught. She had hoped, she had prayed, but the words still felt surreal. She opened her mouth to speak, to express gratitude or disbelief, but Tianita raised a hand gently. "There is more," he continued. "A choice I offer is unlike any ever given before. You may leave the tribe, return to the world from which you came, or you may remain here fully embraced as one of us with the rights and responsibilities that come with it." Eliza's mind raced. Freedom, she realized, was not merely a distant concept, it was a tangible option. She could leave the camp, return to her family, to a life she had once known, though it would never be the same. And yet the thought of leaving this place, of abandoning the bonds she had formed, the trust she had earned, and the life she had begun to build, felt heavier than any chain. She looked at the chief, his gaze unwavering, and saw not only authority but respect, patience, and something unspoken that stirred her heart. He was offering her more than safety. He was offering her choice, dignity, and trust. It was a decision no one in her previous life could have imagined being hers to make. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, focusing instead on the weight of his words. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I've never been given a choice like this before." "Then take time," Tianita said softly. "Consider not only what you want, but what you are willing to build. You are strong enough to decide wisely, but remember, this choice will shape the rest of your life." Eliza walked away slowly, heart racing, mind swirling. She thought of the first days in the camp, the fear and isolation, the awkward missteps and growing understanding. She remembered the children, the women who had quietly accepted her, the warriors who had judged her and then respected her for her courage. And she thought of the chief, his calm, penetrating gaze, his quiet guidance, and the bond that had grown, subtle but undeniable, between them. Night fell, and the camp settled into its quiet rhythm. Eliza sat near the fire with Nayeli, who looked at her expectantly. "Have you decided?" the girl asked gently. Eliza shook her head. "I need to think," she said. But deep inside, the answer had already begun to take shape. She realized that her fear of being powerless, of being sold and treated as less than human, had taught her the value of agency. And now she had been given the rarest gift of all, a choice that respected her strength, courage, and heart. By dawn, she had made her decision. She returned to the chief, standing before him with steady eyes. "I will stay," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I want to remain here, to learn, to help, and to belong. Tyanita regarded her silently for a long moment, then nodded. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Then it is settled," he said. "You are one of us, and we will build the future together." In that moment, Eliza felt an overwhelming surge of relief, pride, and something deeper: hope. She had not only survived, she had been recognized, respected, and trusted, and in the quiet strength of the chief, she sensed that her life had changed forever, in ways she could have never imagined when she had been sold at 19. With the chief's decision, a new chapter began in Eliza's life. She was no longer the girl who had been sold into survival at 19. She was a valued member of the tribe with responsibilities, respect, and a place she could call home. Yet even as she embraced this new life, the process of transformation was gradual, filled with lessons, challenges, and moments of quiet reflection. Her mornings began with purpose. She helped tend the fires, gather food, and assist the women in preparing meals. But now her efforts were not just accepted, they were sought out. The elders asked for her insight on practical matters. The younger girls sought her guidance on chores and customs, and the warriors nodded in approval when she contributed to strategies or suggested improvements. She realized that she had gone from outsider to advisor, from a girl defined by fear to someone whose opinions carried weight. Tyanita's presence, once intimidating and distant, had become a source of steady support. He involved her in decisions, explaining the reasoning behind strategies, teaching her how to read the land, and guiding her through the nuances of leadership and responsibility. In his calm, deliberate way, he encouraged her independence while ensuring she felt safe. Their bond grew deeper, not through words alone, but through shared experiences, understanding and mutual respect. One day, as they repaired a section of the perimeter together, Tyanita paused and looked at her, a rare softness in his dark eyes. "You have grown strong," he said, "not just in body, but in mind and spirit. You are more capable than you know." Eliza felt warmth in her chest, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond simple tasks. She realized that the chief had not only trusted her, but had also nurtured her growth, allowing her to transform from fear into capability, from uncertainty into confidence. The tribe's acceptance of her reached beyond work and survival. Children ran to her for comfort and guidance, laughing as she played with them near the fires. The women included her in rituals, teaching her songs, dances, and the stories that had been passed down for generations. Even the warriors, once skeptical, now offered smiles and nods of acknowledgement. Each gesture, each subtle sign of trust reinforced the truth. Eliza was no longer merely surviving. She was thriving, fully integrated into the community. Yet alongside this transformation, her connection with Tyanita deepened in ways she had not anticipated. Their shared experiences had created a quiet intimacy, a familiarity that was unspoken but undeniable. He began confiding in her, sharing memories of his past, his losses, and the burdens of leadership. In turn, Eliza shared pieces of herself, her life before the snow and desperation, revealing the resilience, courage, and heart that had carried her through. In these moments, she discovered not only trust but a sense of belonging that transcended survival. As the weeks passed, Eliza began to see herself differently. She no longer viewed her past as a shameful memory, but as the crucible that had forged her strength. The girl who had been sold for food had become a woman who had earned respect, built bonds, and claimed agency over her life. She understood now that true transformation required both courage and humility, a willingness to learn and the strength to adapt without losing oneself. One evening, as the camp settled under a blanket of stars, Eliza stood beside Tyanita at the edge of the clearing. They watched the fires flicker, the children sleeping peacefully and the warriors tending their duties. She felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling she had never known in her years of fear and uncertainty. Here, in this wild, unforgiving land, she had found safety, respect, and a place where her heart could grow. Tyanita's voice broke the silence. "You are one of us, Eliza. You belong here not because you were given a choice, but because you earned it." She turned to him, meeting his gaze with a quiet certainty. "I belong," she whispered, "and I will honor that." In that moment, she knew that her transformation was complete, not just in the eyes of the tribe, but in her own. She was no longer the girl sold at 19. She was a woman of courage, trust, and strength, and with Tyanita by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future held, confident that her life had been irrevocably changed for the better. Winter had begun to loosen its grip on the land, and the first signs of spring hinted at life returning to the plains. The snow melted into streams, the air softened with warmth, and the camp buzzed with renewed energy. For Eliza, the season's change mirrored the transformation within herself. What had once been fear, uncertainty, and isolation had blossomed into strength, belonging, and hope. She moved through the camp with ease now, confident in her role and secure in her place among the tribe. Tasks that had once terrified her, hunting, preparing meals, guiding children, assisting warriors, were now second nature. She no longer questioned her value. She understood it. She had earned her place, her respect, and her purpose, not because anyone had gifted them to her, but because she had proven herself in every possible way. And yet, even with her full integration into the tribe, it was the bond with Tyanita that had become the most profound aspect of her life. Their connection, once subtle and unspoken, had grown into something undeniable. He trusted her not only with tasks and decisions, but with his thoughts, his burdens, and his heart. She, in turn, had learned to trust him, to rely on his wisdom and strength, and to share her own courage and resolve without fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the snow and hills in shades of gold and amber, Tyanita approached her. His expression, always calm, carried something deeper today, something tender, resolute, and unmistakably personal. "Eliza," he said softly, taking her hand in his, "you came to us as a stranger, sold out of necessity. You faced fear, hardship, and doubt, yet you became more than anyone could have imagined. You are not only part of this tribe, you are part of my life." Eliza's heart surged. The words were more than acknowledgement. They were a promise, a declaration, and a recognition of the bond that had grown between them. She realized in that moment that her life had changed forever, in ways she had never dared to imagine when she had first been sold at 19. I never expected this," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I only wanted to survive." "And yet," Tyanita said, a faint smile touching his lips, "you have thrived. You have given courage and heart to this tribe and to me. We will face the future together, as one." The simplicity and power of his words left her breathless. She looked around the camp, children laughing as they played, warriors and women working together, fires flickering against the night, and she realized that she had found more than safety or acceptance. She had found family, purpose, and love in a place where she had once felt powerless and alone. That night, under the vast expanse of stars, the tribe gathered around the largest fire. Tyanita stood beside Eliza, and for the first time the world outside the camp seemed distant, irrelevant. Here, in the warmth of the flames, in the laughter and stories of those she had come to care for, Eliza felt a profound sense of belonging. The girl sold for food had become a woman whose heart, courage, and resilience had reshaped not only her destiny, but the lives of those around her. In the days that followed, she and Tyanita worked together to strengthen the tribe's bonds, plan for the seasons ahead, and ensure the safety and prosperity of their people. Their relationship deepened, built on trust, respect, and love, quiet at first but growing steadily, as reliable as the sun rising over the plains. Eliza often thought back to the snow-covered cabin, her parents' desperate faces, and the moment she had been sold. What had seemed like the end had become the beginning of a life richer and fuller than she could have imagined. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had been transformed. She had chosen her future, earned her place, and found a love that was unwavering, grounded, and profound. As she stood beside Tyanita, watching the tribe thrive beneath the fading winter sky, Eliza smiled. She knew that whatever storms might come, she would face them with courage, strength, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone. She had been sold at 19, but she had chosen, fought, and grown into a life that was entirely her own, a life full of belonging, respect, and love. And in that moment, under the vast, endless sky of the plains, Eliza realized that she was truly home.